Chapter 15. Although regular health elixirs could heal even the most debilitating physical injuries, they did shittle to fix ailments or long-term afflictions from Manta-based attacks. I'd learned that lesson on the second floor after contracting sludge lung. Jacob always traveled with a small pharmacy of advanced elixirs and curatives, but he was currently contending against another of the silent but deadly assassins, and he wasn't faring much better than I had. His bazooka was nowhere to be seen and he'd resorted to a melee brawl with the gaseous killer. His regular kite shield had no effect against the monster, but his plasma shield seemed to be able to keep it at bay. At least for now. I was sure the Sendril would win the fight eventually, but he wasn't in a position to help me at the moment. As for the shard golem, it was still on its feet, and hardly looking any worse for wear. Croc and Cynthia 2.0 were working together to whittle down its health, but the process was slow and the creature's HP was still sitting above 60%. The hulking monster fought with its fists and feet, delivering devastating blows that smashed through washing machines and left craters in the concrete. I needed medicine, but that could wait. Though painful and debilitating, the toxic shock affliction wasn't lethal. Not yet, anyway. I had 15 minutes until the next round of symptoms kicked in. That should be more than enough time to finish the golem, especially since my gut told me that the monster would also be susceptible to my sterilization field. There was just one little problem. I needed to get close enough to the creature to activate the spell and my legs didn't seem to be working. Like, at all. Although I could bend my knees and flex my muscles, every time I tried to get back to my feet, my legs just gave out and flatly refused to hold my weight. I ground my teeth in frustration. That had to be the crippling muscle weakness effect at work, and I didn't have anything tucked away in my personal storage that could help. Assuming I made it out of this alive, I planned to rectify that oversight. I had an entire pharmacy lab just sitting there, unused, and in Jacob I had access to a chemist who could make advanced elixirs capable of removing disease and curing even the nastiest afflictions. Those elixirs were far harder to get a hold of than the standard health and Manta variety, and I planned to put the Sendril to work the second we made it back. Or, barring that, have him show me how to make some of the disease-curing salves. Before I could do that, though, I needed to kill the golem. Since my legs wanted to be a couple of little bitches and there was no one close enough to lend me a hand, I'd have to do this the hard way. With a grimace of pain, I flipped onto my belly and began to pull myself across the floor toward the monster. The golem was only 60 feet away, but the bigger issue was that there were a bunch of washing machines in my way. Even the most determined, hard-charging Marine couldn't low-crawl over rows and rows of industrial washing machines. Maybe I could go through them, though. It was an enormous risk, because if I didn't time it right, there was a very real possibility that I would get stuck inside one of the machines, which was exactly as horrific as it sounded. If I did nothing, however, there was a good chance I would die anyway. I'd much rather take fate into my own hands than leave it in someone else's. As I came to the edge of the first washing machine, I activated neural slipstream and the world slowed down around me as ice washed through my veins. I only had a handful of seconds, but as time stretched thin none of that seemed to matter. I pushed through the horrendous pain of my injuries and used every ounce of my heightened athleticism to drag my body with its useless legs across the cold concrete. I phased through the first row of washing machines, then adjusted my angle, and crawled through a second and third row in quick succession, swiftly narrowing the distance between me and the monstrous golem. Sweat poured down my face and my arms quivered from the effort. A wave of nausea rolled through me, but I didn't stop. Couldn't stop. Refused to stop. I was not going to die in some stupid laundromat on the 5th floor. I had too much to do and there were too many people counting on me. Who would feed Croc Froyo? Or make sure that the cockwomble, known as the Flayed Monarch, got some well-deserved karma? Plus, if a super skid mark killed me, I'd never live it down. Like Icarus, I'd forever be the guy who flew too close to the sun and burned for it, except, in my case, instead of the sun it would be a sentient ball of dirty tighty-whities. That was just unacceptable. With a heave, I pulled my feet free of a rusted-out washing machine just as neural slipstream timed out and my body phased back into material existence. I was still 30 feet away from the monster, but now there was nothing other than a field of debris and loose machine parts barring my way. I pulled several more firebomb balls from storage and sent them flying with my mind, lighting the son of a bitch up at a distance as I continued to inch forward, one hand at a time. Bits of broken glass and chunks of twisted metal dug into my arms and legs and chest, opening up fresh wounds with every new foot of ground I covered. Still, I kept moving, hurling firebombs and fault spike grenades at the creature using mental micromanagement until I ran dry of both. Some of the earthen spikes punched holes clean through the creature's fabric torso while others peppered its body, making the monster look like a giant, walking pincushion. The whole while, the golem burned, and its health finally dropped below 50% for the first time. Despite the pain, I smiled. My victory was short-lived, however. With a floor-shaking bellow, the golem raised a hand and let loose a writhing black ball from one oversized palm. The orb shot towards Cynthia. The horror tried to dodge the incoming attack, but the black ball swerved midair then circled around and sideswiped her like a Mack truck. The writhing orb burst apart on impact, and 10,000 tiny black specks swarmed my minion. They were flies, I realized in horror. Hungry, carnivorous flies. Temperance had a similarly disgusting relic called Ball of Spiders, which, as the name heavily implied, let her hurl a ball of spiders at her enemies. I wasn't scared of much, but the idea of 10,000 angry bugs scurrying across my bare skin was great nightmare fuel. The conjured flies started dropping dead a second or two later, but their grisly work was already done. A heap of insect corpses formed around Cynthia, but they'd stripped the meat and fur from her metallic frame. Temperance's spiders only dealt a minute amount of poison damage, while these things were as ravenous as a pack of hungry piranha. Cynthia's HP had dipped below 10% but she was still, miraculously, on her feet, even though at this point she resembled a badly damaged furry Terminator robot. She would fight to the bitter end, but if I let the golem kill her, putting her back together would take substantially more time and effort. Plus, it would cost me another relic. As with my cannon fodder minions, it wasn't my mana that powered the taxidermid horrors, but a relic. And the more powerful the better. Every time they perished, the relic powering their core was destroyed and needed to be replaced before the horror could be called upon once again. That was why, even though it pained me to do it, I recalled her just like I'd done with Drumbo, removing another valuable pawn from the game board. In a fit of rage, the golem spun and hurled another flyball, this one aimed at Croc. The attack never landed. Jacob shot into view and summoned a swirling black vortex about the size of a manhole cover. The spell hung, unsupported in the air, strobing steadily with waves of black and purple light. The ball of carnivorous flies immediately veered off course, pulled into the miniature black hole, where it promptly disappeared. It was Jacob's gravity well relic at work, which literally hoovered up all ranged attacks in its area of effect like a magical shop vac. A very handy spell. There was no sign of the other silent but deadly assassin, which meant Jacob had killed the creature, and now he was doing his job as the party tank. The Sendril darted forward, surrounded in a nimbus of golden light, and as he moved the blare of a siren emanated from his chest, burr-burr burr-burr. It sounded like a broken smoke detector being amplified through a bullhorn. The relic's sole purpose was to draw aggro and hold the attention of hostile dwellers, and boy oh boy did it work well. The golem spun toward the approaching Sendril, but instead of immediately attacking, the creature threw its misshapen head back and roared once again. This time, a geyser of sludgy brown liquid blasted up into the air like Old Faithful. All I could do was lay there, face down on the floor, completely unable to stand as a tsunami of liquid shit hit the ground and surged toward me. I was starting to wish I'd just let the fart assassin finish the job and save me from the indignity of drowning in the equivalent of a hot porta-john. Seconds before the punami washed over me, however, a trio of fleshy pinky tentacles hoisted me from the floor and pulled me up to the top of a nearby washing machine. "Don't worry, Dan," Croc said, cradling me like a newborn kitten, which did not in any way help my dwindling self-esteem. "I've got you." "My legs aren't working," I grunted. At this point, even talking hurt. "Do you need any elixir?" Croc asked, "Because I've got plenty of those stored inside my chest cavity if you need one." "Won't work," I mumbled through clenched teeth. Also, I hated that Croc stored things inside its chest cavity, though I kept that opinion to myself. "Poison." I stole a look at the golem. "Get me closer," I wheezed. "Need to be in melee range." "Say no more, Dan." Croc pressed me tight against its rubbery belly and tendrils of blue crept over me, forming a giant baby Bjorn made of flesh. My useless legs dangled down, hanging several feet above the floor, though the impromptu baby holster didn't restrict my arms, which was nice. Croc took 3 steps, then leapt from the top of the washing machine and hit the ground running. The metaphorical mudslide had receded, but the floor was still slick, and every footfall sent up a disgusting little splash of unspeakable liquid. I really hoped those brownies were miracle workers, or I was never going to be able to get the stink out. The golem was entirely focused on Jacob, but Croc still angled right, circling around until we were in the creature's blind spot. As soon as we were in range, I activated sterilization field again, conjuring a dome of blazing blue-white light that encompassed the monster. The spell's effect went to work instantly. The magic ball of flies forming in the golem's hand fizzled and simply winked out of existence, but that wasn't all the spell did. My guess about the golem was right. The mana holding the monster together began to unravel, and as it did, soiled tidy whities and brown-streaked boxer briefs rained down en masse. The creature howled and desperately tried to get clear of the dome. It didn't get far. Glowing tendrils of multicolored light erupted from the floor and emerged from the itself, wrapping around the monster's arms and legs, neck and torso, mooring it in place. I'd only seen Jacob use this particular ability a handful of times, mostly because it was extremely mana-intensive, and Sendrils, as a race, had famously low mana reserves and even worse mana regeneration. Still, it was badass to watch in action. Quantum Entanglement was a powerful crowd control ability that conjured unbreakable cables of quantum string, capable of rooting enemy targets in place. Although the root spell wouldn't last long, the golem was losing HP like the Titanic taking on water. The monster was literally falling apart, and its health was already down below 20%. Time to finish the job. Although I was out of runic grenades, I still had mana to burn, so I raised one hand and activated Pressure Washer, zigzagging the beam across the monster's chest and face. The golem let out one more frustrated roar as its health hit 0, and then, in an eye blink, it simply crumbled, the magic animating its body bled dry by the sterilization field. Level up. X1 Research Achievement unlocked. Profane Purifier. Are you proud of yourself? Because you shouldn't be. I mean, sure, you won, but at what cost? Your dignity, that's what. Still, I'll hand it to you, when the going got rough, you rolled up your sleeves and just dove right in there. That's either incredibly brave or you've got some weird fetishes we don't want to explore. Anyway, just remember, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. Or gives you dysentery. I can't remember which. Both, it's probably both. Reward, 750 experience points, 5 copper delver loot tokens, 1 silver medic loot token, 1x gold septic loot token. Title, Profane Purifier minus 20% disease resistance because, after this, what germs would dare to touch you? Notice, you have earned 11 titles. You may only have 10 active titles equipped at any given time. Visit the nearest progenitor monolith to curate your titles, via the title tab located in your Specimen Bio Report (SBR). As I waved away the notifications, all that remained of the golem was a mountainous pile of dirty laundry. Fitting. With the golem finally dead and the threat eliminated, Jacob wasted no time in breaking out his advanced first aid kit and taking care of my toxic shock affliction. Unfortunately, he wasn't quite quick enough to cure me before the next stage took hold. Toxic shock syndrome has metastasized, and new symptoms have evolved. Stage 3, delirium. rapid onset anxiety disorder and broad-scale hallucinations. Grit and perception are reduced by 25%, and the user is 50% more susceptible to sonic attacks and psychic influences. Stage 4, countdown until additional onset symptoms 29-59. The psychedelic effects kicked in at once, and suddenly it was no longer Jacob standing over me. Instead, it was an enormous, fire-breathing cyberpunk dragon wearing a red pleather jacket and vintage wraparound sunglasses. From the corner of my eye, I spotted Croc, who now stood 80 feet tall and most closely resembled an eldritch Voltron robot made of writhing tentacles and unblinking goggly eyes. Just another Tuesday in the backrooms. After rubbing a weird lotion on the side of the knife wound and force-feeding me a putrid concoction that tasted like burnt rubber, the god-awful affliction vanished, taking the host of terrible after-effects with it. Thank sweet baby Jesus for small miracles. With my affliction cured, all that was left to do was loot the corpses, a task no one was overly keen about, then deal with the brownies, still hiding away in their tiny laundromat kingdom. Considering what I'd just endured, however, that didn't seem so bad anymore. Say what you will, but crawling across broken glass while fighting a sentient turd certainly is a way of offering a little perspective. It felt like I'd finally hit rock bottom, which meant the only way to go from here was up. Chapter 16. The three of us immediately started to pick over the corpses, all with varying degrees of success. Unfortunately, the silent but deadly assassin I'd fried with my sterilization field hadn't left any relics behind. It seemed my spell had obliterated the creature so thoroughly that not even its spatial core had survived the attack. The only trace of its existence was the putrid black blade, which had almost killed me. All in all, I wasn't too upset, though, since the blade was the real prize anyway. Septic Shive rare artifact type, bladed weapon effect duration, until cured cooldown, none. It's a knife, dipshit. The Septic Shive is an uncommonly nasty piece of work that looks like it was forged in fires of Isengard. Except, in this case, Isengard is an Eastern European hostel where organ smugglers harvest kidneys from unsuspecting backpackers. As sharp as a dirty hypodermic needle, this thing was made for stabbing. Every successful hit has a 15% chance to afflict the unlucky schmuck on the other end with progressive toxic shock syndrome. Trust me on this, it's real bad. Maybe wash your hands after touching this thing? Just to be on the safe side. Stage 1, extreme headaches, high fever, and mild disorientation. Stage 2, full body aches and crippling muscle weakness. Athleticism and toughness are reduced by 25%. Health and stamina regeneration are reduced by 50%. Stage 3, delirium, rapid onset anxiety disorder, and broad-scale hallucinations. Grit and perception are reduced by 25%, and the user is 50% more susceptible to sonic attacks and psychic influences. Stage 4, organ failure and hemorrhagic fever causes bleeding from eyes, ears, nose, mouth, and rectum. Suffer 2 points of bleed damage and 2 points of putrefaction damage per second until cured. The rate of stage progression is based on the victim's relative level and overall toughness. No fuss, plenty of muss. Hold the power of good old-fashioned biological warfare right in the palm of your hand. I whistled through my teeth. Jesus, Mary, and Joseph, the dagger was brutal. And to think I'd been a mere half-hour away from total organ failure and hemorrhagic fever. I mean, what in the hell? I was pretty sure using this thing counted as a war crime against The Hague. Stage 4 dealt 4 points of damage per second, for a total of 240 points of damage per minute. I only had 77 total HP to my name. I would have lasted all of 30 seconds had the affliction finished metastasizing. The only silver lining, if there was one at all, was that each stage of the illness took progressively longer before activating, though even that depended on several different factors. The artifact was diabolical and abhorrent, which is why I planned to immediately add it into my arsenal. I didn't like having it used on me, but I'd be more than happy to use it against other people. Especially any of those Shathiel aspirants from the Skinless Court. Fuck all of those guys. Maybe if they started spontaneously bleeding from their rectums, they'd finally get the message and leave me the hell alone. Interestingly, the summoned assassin Jacob had killed didn't have a septic shiv but did drop a single uncommon grade relic called gaseous form. It was a similar, but worse version of neural slipstream, and allowed the user to assume an intangible gaseous form for 3 seconds, rendering them immune from all normal weapons. The drawback was that it gave the user intense IBS so long as it was equipped. Still, a case of the run seemed like a small price to pay for intangibility and damage immunity. Since Jacob had made the kill, he hung on to the reward, though I couldn't imagine he would keep it long term. The golem had 3 different relics, 2 uncommon, 1 rare. Since Krok and I had done the bulk of the heavy lifting, I ended up keeping the rare relic and one of the uncommon great relics, though I gave Jacob first pick. Only seemed far since he'd saved me from getting pancaked by a flying washing machine. He wisely took the better, and somehow less gross of the 2 relics, ball of flies. The relic looked like one of those hanging fly strips, and it was covered with tiny black bodies with iridescent wings. Although the conjured flies didn't last long, they were gluttonous little bastards who ate living flesh and dealt a single point of slashing damage each before dropping dead. The spell cost 45 mana to cast and had a 1 minute cooldown, which was a lot. But it also summoned 100 flies, which made it a terrifyingly powerful ranged weapon and well worth the cost. I idly wondered if it would be possible to merge Ball of Flies with Temperance's Ball of Spiders relic to form something greater than the sum of its parts. That seemed reasonable, though I wasn't sure Temp would be open to the idea. She took an almost perverse delight in hurling spiders at people. The other uncommon great relic resembled a dirty plunger and was appropriately called Mudslide. It was also a powerful ranged attack that allowed the user to conjure a putrid geyser of sludge that dealt a combination of bludgeoning and disease damage. Aside from being objectively disgusting, in a lot of ways it was also shockingly similar to Pressure Washer. It had the same general range and dealt a similar level of base damage. I had absolutely no desire, whatsoever, to add the rancid item to my spatial core, for what should have been fairly obvious reasons, but my gut told me that I might be able to forge it with some of the other relics I had lying around and turn it into something truly formidable. The most interesting relic by far, however, was the last. Collective Consciousness. Rare relic, level 1. Range, 100 meters. Cost, 1 mana a minute. Buckle up, Buttercup, because it's time for a hive mind hootenanny. Those fragmented golems you see wandering around. Well, they are not just a pretty pile of rocks, or a hive of sentient man-shaped bees, nor even a meat kiju composed entirely of rotting corpses. Nope, they are what we in the biz like to call a collective consciousnesses, the ultimate mind-melding club, which utilizes a rudimentary mana link to share their thoughts and feelings to become a big, bad unified force of nature. Think of it as the metaphysical equivalent of a workers' union, but with more telepathy and less picketing. With collective consciousness, you get to play puppet master by entering a powerful trance that allows you to mentally merge with a summoned minion, seeing what they see, doing what they do, and maybe even figuring out why they never laugh at your jokes. The catch is, while you're out on your cerebral joyride, your body is in a catatonic state, just sitting there like a loaf of moldy bread. Word to the wise, be careful where you activate this bad boy. This relic enables mana use. After reading over the relic description, I realized why my sterilization field had been so extremely effective against the golem. The creature wasn't a single entity at all, but a large collective literally held together by pure mana. The sterilization field had effectively nullified the effects of collective consciousness, causing the creature to fall apart, unable to hold itself together any longer. Although the relic itself had some serious drawbacks, it would definitely be going into my private collection. Although I could already control my horrors with a limited form of telekinesis, directing them much the way I could my demolition screwdriver, this ability was far more potent. More visceral. It sounded like I'd be able to mentally slip into their bodies, piloting my minions from a distance like a horrific meat mech. It was just like being a warg from Game of Thrones, but cooler because of chainsaw hands. With that said, I still wasn't completely gung-ho about adding it to my spatial core, for two major reasons. First, the spell was line of sight only, which meant I needed to physically be able to see the meat mech in question, and having my actual body slip into a coma in the middle of a battle seemed like a terrible idea. It was possible I could work out a short-term solution, but then there was the second problem to consider. I just didn't have any more room in my spatial core. In the early days, the thought of finding 10 useful relics seemed like an impossible goal, but now I was swimming in powerful relics, and I just didn't have enough slots for them all. Thanks to Runic Resonance Trap, I now had a clever workaround for some of my active spell-based abilities, but to properly employ an ability like Collective Consciousness, I'd need to have it equipped. As I examined my newest prize, however, I realized there might be another potential solution. This new relic had a strange sort of synergy with several of the other relics I already had. Existential Dread, Mental Micromanagement, Unhinged Taxidermist, Form Fleshtron, Go, and Neural Slipstream. Instinctively, I knew I couldn't just combine all of these into one super relic. They were all wildly different from one another, yet somehow, they were related. They shared a similar purpose. Like puzzle pieces that belonged together in a way I couldn't quite understand. I stared at them for a long moment, brow furrowed, when something finally clicked, and a new prompt swam into view. Resonant Mana Signature detected. Would you like to forge Existential Dread? Rare, fully tempered, level 5, Mental Micromanagement Uncommon, level 2, Unhinged Taxidermist Rare, level 1, Form Fleshtron, Go. Rare, level 1, Neural Slipstream Fabled, fully tempered, level 5, and Collective Consciousness Rare, level 1 into a new emblem? Asterisk. Yes no? My mouth dropped open in disbelief, and I was tempted to select yes out of pure, unadulterated excitement. The only emblem I'd ever seen was the compass of the Catacomber, and it had come courtesy of the Flayed Monarch. It was also so insanely powerful that the monarch was willing to go to war to get that back. It wasn't hard to understand why. Emblems were rare with a capital RL, they were more than rare. They were legends spoken about in whispers. They were myths like Bigfoot or the Chupacabra that only conspiracy theorists and rednecks believed in. Most delvers never even got a glimpse of one, and those that did usually didn't live long enough to tell anyone else. Emblems were shrouded in mystery. But the one thing everyone agreed on was that they didn't occur naturally. They were made. Forged by combining a group of powerful relics, which all served a related purpose. I assumed there was some truth to that, based simply on the type of relics contained within the compass of the Catacomber. They all dealt with navigating, manipulating, or altering the backrooms themselves in some fundamental way. As I examined the highlighted relics, I realized they also shared a unifying function. Each relic dealt with the mind in one capacity or another. Existential Dread allowed me to manipulate the minds of others. With mental micromanagement, I could telekinetically move things with my mind, while Unhinged Taxidermist, Form Fleshtron, Go, and Collective Consciousness touched on expanded states of mental awareness in one way or another. Hell, Neural Slipstream literally let me become a creature of pure thought, at least for a short while. Although emblems didn't enhance the individual relics within, they offered one huge benefit. Emblems only took up a single spatial core slot. If I could forge these into an emblem, it would allow me to equip additional relics, which was the next best thing to a cheat code in this place. As excited as I was, however, I didn't accept. Instead, I ran a compatibility analysis first, just to hedge my bets. Researcher's Codex Compatibility Analysis. Warning. Unstable emblem configuration detected. Based on historic datasets and extensive forging models, the Codex Analytics model predicts that attempting to combine the designated relics into a unifying emblem has a 12% chance of success. With such a low resonance compatibility, creating a predictive forging model is not possible at this time. Combing these relics will likely result in an unfavorable outcome, including the total destruction of all forged materials. To increase the chances of success, consider performing the following action items. Utilize relics of rare great quality or higher to decrease potential per generation decay. Utilize fully leveled relics to decrease the likelihood of negative runic interactions. Utilize fully tempered relics to drastically increase the chance of total resonance compatibility while further reducing undesirable iteration deviations. Would you like to proceed with the emblem forging process? Yes, no? With a frown, I selected no and waved away the prompt while 1,000 thoughts sprinted through my head. Well shit. Easy come, easy go, I guess. Based on the new information provided by the codex, it seemed I wouldn't be forging an emblem anytime soon, but it did open a whole new realm of possibilities. Until now, I'd been selecting relics based on pure survival utility without any broader strategy. Now, however, I had an active goal to work toward. Finding or forging fully tempered relics wasn't exactly a walk in the park, but thanks to the codex I already had 3, Stinslayer Maelstrom, Neural Slipstream, and Existential Dread, which was far more than most delvers. With this new insight, I could now actively search for anything that had either a mental or telekinetic component and make even more. Still, as exciting as this was, I needed to pump the brakes. At least for now. I couldn't afford to get distracted when I was so close to the goal line. I needed to deal with the brownies so I could get back and finalize things with Ajax. That was the priority. That was the mission. And the mission always came first. Everything else would just have to wait. I deposited the new relics into my storage space, then turned on one heel and picked my way over the debris-covered floor and back to the tidy and well-lit laundromat. Chapter 17. We found Bertram and the rest of the priests celebrating in the laundromat, and this time they weren't alone. There had to be at least 300 or more of the laundry brownies, some wearing baggy overalls, others wearing floral dresses. Well now, this is certainly an unexpected turn of events, Jacob said, as we eyed the gathering of brownies from a distance. The Sendel sounded both shocked and mildly amused. He wasn't the only one. Bertram's codex description had mentioned that brownies were communal creatures, but I'd been expecting a dozen. Maybe 2, tops. Certainly not 300 or more. The sprawling city, tucked away inside of a large employees-only utility closet, was also something of a gut punch. The homes were made from old plastic detergent bottles, bits of assorted metal, and a variety of other salvaged garbage. Beer bottles. Machine cogs. Wooden clothespins. Canvas from the laundry carts. That sort of thing. The smaller, simpler homes covered the closet floor, while larger, more elaborate manors were perched higher up on storage shelves, overlooking those below. Even here, it was clear there was a pecking order to be followed. Barbie doll-sized wooden ladders and rope bridges crisscrossed the space, reminding me of the intricate howler catwalks, and strings of white Christmas lights festooned the closet, casting the tiny village in an otherworldly glow. Looming above the city, perched on the highest shelf like some ever-watchful gargoyle, was a massive cathedral that dwarfed the rest of the tiny buildings. The temple was carefully crafted from the innards of a washing machine. Rivets ran along the face of the building, and cogs and gears, polished to a mirrored sheen, served as ornamental decorations. Intricate stained glass windows were inset into the cathedral's walls, and a brass handle set in the building's central steeple. Even though the city was small in stature, I had to admit it was damn impressive, and so was the sheer craftsmanship on display. Honestly, I was wondering how in the hell a bunch of laundry brownies had managed to accomplish the task. As I surveyed the crowd, though, I began to realize that not all of the brownies were laundry brownies at all. There were housekeeping brownies, maintenance brownies, metalsmith brownies, seamstress brownies. Hell, I even spotted an electrical engineering brownie. There were a few brownies that had no class at all, and as I inspected them a little more closely, I realized those were probably what passed for kids. Interestingly, though, the laundry brownies were the most powerful of the lot. All level 10 or higher and dressed in significantly nicer clothes than the rest of their kin. "Oh my God, Dan," Croc crooned from beside me. "They're so cute. Can't we keep 'em all, Dan? Please, please, please. They are just so adorable. My heart is melting." They look just like those precious little porcelain Hummel figurines that are in the keepsake cove on the 3rd floor. I love those little things. But these ones are even better because they are real. The mimic's whole body was vibrating in sheer excitement. These things aren't toys, Croc. This is an entire society of sentient beings we're talking about here. I know, Dan. But I promise, I'll help take care of them. I'll make sure to feed them every day and take them for walks. I even know where there's a pet store. I could get a bunch of exercise wheels, or maybe some of those plastic tubes. Can you imagine, Dan? A tube city, just like at the Jungle Gym Jamboree, except it would be brownie-sized? Imagine how many slides I could make for them. And I promise I'll never eat them, even if they do smell delicious. Please, Dan. Please? I sighed and pinched the bridge of my nose. Of course, Croc wanted to keep them like a bunch of pet hamsters. Why was I not surprised? I'll think about it, I said, but first we need to convince them to come back to the store with us. Up ahead, Bertram had ascended a set of tiny stairs and was now standing on a small wooden podium. He raised a tiny golden chalice, filled wine. A human-sized bottle of cheap Merlot, easily as large as any of the brownies, was on its side with some sort of beer tap mechanism affixed to the top. One of Bertram's purple-robed acolytes filled glasses, which were quickly picked up and whisked away by serving brownies, carrying silver trays. Let us drink and be merry. Bertram caterwaulted the assembled crowd. After performing the sacred summoning ritual, once a day, every day, for more than 4 years, the prophecy foretold has at last been fulfilled, and the researcher has sent to us the chosen one. The deliverer. He who has vanquished the profane corrupter. He paused, his tone darkening. Although many of you despaired on account of all the false prophets who came before, we chosen few kept the faith and have been rewarded for our unwavering belief. A raucous cheer went up as the brownies hooted and hollered, lifting thimble-sized mugs in salute. They drank in great gulps, slapping each other on the backs and doing little jigs as a band took to a raised stage and started playing what could only be described as polka music. They had someone playing a miniature tuba and another brownie, decked out in lederhosen, sawing back and forth on an actual, working accordion. I had so many questions and didn't even know where to begin. Watching their celebration unfold was like watching an LSD-fueled, fever dream directed by David Lynch. I really didn't want to ruin their good time, but I had shit to do and places to be. With a sigh, I left Croc and Jacob standing by the entryway and begrudgingly tromped over to the brownie shindig, not bothering to muffle my footfalls. Somehow, the brownies still didn't hear my approach over the blaring polka music. Honestly, these little critters had all the situational awareness and self-preservation of a drunk toddler. It was a wonder they'd survived as long as they had. I raised a hand and cleared my throat to get their attention. Finally, a few of the little weirdos noticed my presence. The accordion music cut off with an abrupt jangle, followed in short order by the tuba and the cowbell player. The brownies in the crowd began to turn toward me, only a handful at first, but more and more by the second. Soon a harsh silence settled over the gathering. The quiet didn't last long as they fell to their knees in waves, some prostrating themselves completely, a few openly crying, others chanting what the fuck over and over again like a sacred prayer. In less than a minute, only Bertram remained on his feet, hands raised toward me. Deliverer, you have returned, victorious from battle against the profane corrupter, the high priest of laundry services intoned formally. Praise be to you and to the researcher, who sent you from above. Long have we waited for your glorious reign to begin in earnest. Come again now? I asked, caught off guard. Long and glorious reign? Bertram dry-washed his hands and nervously licked his lips as though this might be some sort of test of faith. Surely, you but jest with your humble servant, the priest replied, dipping his head low. The prophecies of old tell that one day a savior will come, sent from the researcher to deliver us from the profane corrupter. Then, once the deliverer has struck the killing blow, he shall usher in a golden age of endless prosperity. Maybe convincing them to come back to the shop would be easier than I thought. Clearly, these guys were in some weird cult, and although I really didn't want to feed into their delusional bullshit, I also needed them if I wanted to fulfill my deal with the Howlers. Plus, the idea of having a bunch of laundry minions, scampering around and cleaning my gear, was strangely appealing. I hated doing laundry. The question was, did I hate doing laundry enough to become the de facto leader of a brownie cult? I only had to mull it over for a second. Yes, I did hate doing laundry enough to become the de facto leader of a brownie cult. Inside, I wouldn't feel good about it, but outside I'd feel great because I would no longer be forced to walk around in a gore-soaked bathrobe. It was in fact a test, I intoned somberly, channeling my best Sunday preacher voice. And you have passed, my faithful ones. The researcher has indeed sent me, as you can see by the sacred seal, which bears his mark. I pulled free a golden medallion from my storage space. On one side was a giant thumbs up. On the back were the words, "Researcher approved." I'd gotten the seal out of a gas-shapen machine in a third-floor loot arcade. The metal glimmered in the glow of the Christmas lights and the brownies oohed and awed appropriately. Yep. Researcher approved, I continued, stashing away the medallion. He sent us here to defeat the darkness and usher in an age of plenty, just like your prophecy said. And what an age it'll be, I added. Have any of you ever heard of pizza? I asked, cocking an eyebrow. Some muttered no, while others shook their heads in confusion. By way of explanation, I pulled an entire pepperoni pie from my storage, the bottom of the box already soggy from all the accumulated grease. The pizza was still piping hot, and when I flipped the cardboard lid, a thick, aromatic wave rolled out. I set the pizza down and scooted it toward the brownies with the toe of a boot. Hungry gazes fixed on the pizza like a pack of predatory wolves. Never in all my years have I ever smelled something so rich. So savory, Bertram said, voice quivering as he spoke. That's not all either, I replied, fishing out an ice-cold six-pack of Bud Light. I yanked a can from the plastic holder, expertly cracked the tab with one finger, then shook it and let a spray of beer rain down on the party-goers. That right there, Bert, is 100% all-American beer. Or, as I like to call it, the elixir of the gods. It's 1,000 times better than that shitty wine y'all are drinking. In the paradise I will take you to, a land overflowing with beer and pizza, you shall never want for a hot, fresh slice of pie or a frosty cold one. This, I swear. And what would you ask of us in return for such a plentiful bounty, O great one? Bertram asked, awe evident in his voice. Simple, I replied with a shrug. I just need you to do some laundry. And maybe a couple of other routine housekeeping tasks, I added, glancing at the group of assembled brownies. As good as laundry service would be, I could get a lot of millage out of 300 highly motivated workers. It would be our honor to serve, O great one, Bertram replied, falling to his knees. It is for this very purpose that we were fashioned and formed. This day, a covenant is struck between our people. We shall not disappoint you. On this, I give my solemn word. The tiny priest removed a blackened dagger from the baggy folds of his robes and slashed the blade across his forearm. A tiny stream of purple dribbled down. Huh. That was a little disconcerting. Cool, I said nodding, while a tight knot of worry formed in the pit of my stomach. I'm sure this is not going to blow up in my face in any way, I grumbled under my breath. Then, more loudly for the assembled brownie cultists, well, no point in waiting. Let's get this show on the road. The land of pizza and beer awaits, and I've got a shit ton of laundry to get done. A cheer went up at the proclamation. I expanded my mini-map and selected the entirety of the laundromat, then activated Corvo's blanket fort. You've selected 2,170 square feet of eligible pro-generated material resource space. Would you like to use Corvo's blanket fort to convert the selected material into a personal superspace dwelling? You will have 40,097 available square feet remaining at your current variant assimilation level. Proceed yes/no? I hit yes and waited patiently as the backrooms worked its strange magic. The laundromat, once buried deep beneath the 5th floor, rattled and shook, the lights flickering and strobing madly. Then, just as quick as the tremors had come, they subsided. I headed over to the sliding glass door and stepped into the blazing light of my shop. I took a deep sigh of relief, glad that everything had finally come together. All that was left to do now was get back to the hold and make sure everything was squared away with Ajax. First, though, I wanted to see these guys in action. I gingerly peeled off my bathrobe and tossed it on the floor, not far from the entrance to their hidden city in the closet. Let's start with that and see how you do. And make it quick. I've got important chosen one stuff to be about. Of course, deliver. Your will be done. Bertram clapped his hands sharply and the others jumped to comply. I watched in smug satisfaction as a horde of brownies rushed over to the crumpled robe and whisked it off toward one of the washers, while others hustled to grab detergent, fabric softener, and other powders I couldn't immediately identify. I left them to their work and headed over to the break room, bound for my private quarters. It hadn't even been a full day since I'd added the hotel room, but holy hell did I need another shower. After the battle with the golem, it was possible I'd need to take two. Chapter 18. The brownies were every bit the miracle workers that Ajax had made them out to be. They were zealots of the highest order, their religion was laundry, and there were none more devout. By the time I made it back to the spin cycle, my bathrobe had been washed, dried, pressed, and neatly hung with care. Unfortunately, it was still an ass-ugly knockoff Versace, which made me weep for humanity, but now it was only hurt my eyes and not my nose. The robe was spotless, immaculately clean. There was no sign of any damage whatsoever, and the high priest of laundry had even blessed the garment, adding 2 temporary buffs, which both lasted for 24 hours. The first was a non-stackable passive called fabric fortification, which increased armor rating and item durability by 10% for the duration of the spell. That wouldn't do much for me personally, since my gear offered virtually no physical protection and naturally repaired itself over time, but it would be worth its weight in gold to delvers like Jacob and Temperance, who fought up close and personal. The second buff was even better. Grunge Guard Extreme repelled liquids, prevented stains and, most importantly, diminished the effects of elemental spells by 5%. Now, 5% may not have sounded like a whole lot, but unlike fabric fortification this effect stacked up to 25% total resistance. 5% for each item blessed. Honestly, I was sad I couldn't just cheat the system and gain total immunity to elemental attacks by waddling around in 3 pairs of pants, 20 t-shirts, and a couple of winter jackets. Still, 25% was pretty damned good. Originally, I'd been planning to offer laundry services free of charge as a public safety initiative, but now that I knew about the buffs, there was no reason I couldn't charge a modest and totally reasonable fee. Under Croc's diligent supervision, I even had Baby Hands create a punch card reward system. Do 9 loads at regular price and get the 10th load free. As for the brownies themselves, they seemed completely content with our new arrangement. They worked happily. I paid them in pizza, beer, and gummy worms taken from the candy aisle. Turned out, they really liked gummy worms. To an almost unnatural and unhealthy degree. But so long as the laundry got done, I didn't care about what they chose to shove in their tiny little face holes. Things were finally coming together, and I was feeling significantly more optimistic about the future than I had in a long while. I was almost ready to venture back over to the hold and make good on my bargain with Ajax, but before I did, I wanted to make a few upgrades around the store. Square everything away before I officially opened the doors to a few hundred new shoppers. My storage space was damn near overflowing with body parts, and I wanted to unload them into my newly acquired freezer unit. I also needed to make some repairs to both Cynthia 2.0 and Drumbo, plus it was probably time to level up my unhinged taxidermy relic and add a few new minions to my combat roster. Especially considering how much raw material I had to work with. And, speaking of minions, with the addition of the hotel room, freezer, and laundromat, I had officially claimed over 15,000 square feet of floor space. Which meant I could add another cannon fodder golem to help run the store. Help I would absolutely need with all the new customers we were about to get. Then there was the security office to consider, with its cameras and monitors. Typically, those types of security measures would be used in the store itself, but I wasn't really worried about shoplifting. Not with Baby Hands and Princess Pony Puff on perpetual duty. And woe to the unlucky son of a bitch who got caught stealing by Princess Pony Puff. She'd probably go all flayed monarch and wear their face as a mask to deter future thieves. With those changes in mind, I pulled up my blanket fort interface and got to work. The interface served much the same function as the progenitor monolith, but for the store instead of for me. With it, I could view a staggeringly long list of available resource materials, plus it granted me access to a set of 3D interactive schematics, which allowed me to manipulate and even reconfigure the space as I deemed fit. The doorway to my personal hotel room was currently located in the overflow storage area, which we turned into temporary lodging for visiting delvers. Although it made sense to have it there, I decided it would work better, long-term, to have some additional space between myself and the customers. With a few quick shifts, I uprooted the entire room and attached it to the employee break room instead, which would now serve as the operations hub for the store's staff. Working on that same principle, I relocated the new security office from the front of the store to the break room as well. I retrieved the ancient computer and bulky printer I'd looted from the maintenance corridors on 5, then took a few extra minutes to set both up in the security office. Surprise, surprise, the computer was a piece of shit, but it also had a copy of Microsoft Office 95 installed and, for reasons I couldn't even begin to explain, a copy of Doom. I didn't have much time these days for video games, but it was hard to say no to OG Doom. It took me longer than I'd like to admit to hook up the printer, but eventually I got things connected and even printed out a handful of marketing flyers that I could post around. I'd still need ample access to spray paint, but the flyers would save me countless hours of writing. Next, I turned my attention to the 10 dual etheric walkie-talkies sitting on top of the safe beside the desk. Although there was a distinct possibility they were cursed, I still planned on using them. There was virtually no reliable communication network within the backrooms, not that I'd seen, anyway, so the ability to talk with my friends, even when we were on different floors, was worth the risk of potential insanity. I slipped one into my tool belt, then gave one to Croc and another to Jacob. I idly considered handing over one more to Penny Puff, because it would be nice for someone in the store to have access, but eventually decided against it. I was pretty sure she would either A, use it to try and raise her Dark Lord, Vorgel the devouring maw that dwells beneath, or B, constantly screech inarticulate goat noises at me. Neither was a great option. In theory, I could give one to Baby Hands, but there was no way the golem had the necessary IQ to work something as complicated as a walkie-talkie. I once saw the poor bastard mopping a patch of carpet. Croc loved that moron and Baby Hands was one hell of a hard worker. But with the mental prowess of a deflated basketball, he would never do much more than stock shelves or clean up spills. Giving one to either Taylor or Stephanie was also a potential option, but that was an even bigger gamble than handing it over to Pony Puff, albeit for very different reasons. For the most part, I trusted the two girls not to screw me over, but I didn't want to hand them a weapon that could potentially be used to betray me. Walkie-talkies like these weren't encrypted devices. They relied on radio frequencies to communicate, which meant anyone with one of the walkies would be able to eavesdrop on other conversations. Since we'd be relaying sensitive info over those walkies, like our location and movements, and I couldn't afford one of the devices ending up in the hands of an aspirant. What I really needed was someone manning the store who was as unflinchingly loyal as Baby Hands and as smart as Penny Puff, but not completely batshit insane. The question I needed to answer now was, what role would this new golem fill? I learned that here in the backrooms, intention mattered. If this was going to work, I needed a clear plan in mind. I briefly considered crafting another golem to help Pony Puff at the checkout counter, but dismissed the idea after mulling it over for a bit. Truth was, Pony Puff was great at her job, but she did not play particularly well with others. Adding another golem into the mix was just asking for trouble. Besides, if she really needed extra help manning the front desk, I could always ask Taylor and Stephanie to pick up the slack. Ponypuff seemed to tolerate the two of them, more or less. No, what I really needed was someone completely trustworthy to run security while I was away from the store. Someone who could monitor the CCTV screens, call in any emergencies, and keep the peace between Delvers when tempers invariably got hot. Right now, Baby Hands was doing the bulk of the heavy lifting in that department, but I needed a minion who could de-escalate tensions and who could make critical decisions in my absence. What I needed was a security chief. Although cannon fodder golems could literally be crafted from almost anything, the material used in their creation played a key role in shaping the minion's personality. When building Ponypuff and Baby Hands, I'd used the random leftover garbage that had been lying around the store. Stuff I didn't want to keep and saw no other use for. The results spoke for themselves, and this time around I planned on making better choices. And, even more important than the physical material, was the relic that powered the creature. I'd used Gremlin's Growing Guardian for Baby Hands, a passive, common-grade relic that looked like a dirty jockstrap and granted additional protection to the user's junk. As a result, Baby Hands had the intellect of dirty jockstrap. For Ponypuff I'd used a mind-based relic called Tinfoil Hat of Mind Shielding, which increased grit and offered a resistance against hypnotic cynics. It was decent enough relic, but also something I could easily see an insane conspiracy theorist using. Metaphorically, Princess Ponypuff was the spitting image of a conspiracy theorist wearing a tinfoil hat. Smart, sure, but zero interpersonal skills. For this new golem, I wanted a better quality relic which also resonated with the idea of security. Then, I further wanted to reinforce that notion by using physical materials that thematically fit with the outcome I had in mind. To that end, I ventured into the store and raided the survival aisle first, grabbing a wide assortment of items including a camouflage poncho, a green tactical jacket, and a backpack loaded with more survival supplies, a compass and a machete, a spool of nylon 550 cord, a small entrenching shovel and a fire starter. A pair of heavy work boots went into the mix, followed by a simple first aid kit, jumper cables, and a couple of reflected roadside warning triangles. Someone had traded in a clear riot shield, a matching police helmet, though neither were artifacts, and a common-grade artifact taser, which dealt 15 points of shock damage on contact, but had a 2-minute cooldown timer between uses. It dealt too little damage for me to use, but it would be perfect for some in-store muscle. All of it went into a large pile in the security office. I took a gamble and decided to add one of the security cameras as well, hoping it would still function even after I brought the minion to life. I paid Princess Ponypuff a visit and riffled through the available relics we had on hand, but nothing really jumped out at me. The majority were common grade, though we had a decent mix of active spells, physical abilities, and even a few passive and utility skills. There were a few uncommons as well and even a single rare, but none of them screamed security to me. Thankfully, I didn't need to rely on the relics we had, because I could forge something to fit the bill. Working off a hunch, I took a basic combo kit, then grabbed Sucker Punch, which was another plentiful common-grade relic from the third floor. Basic combo allowed its user to moderately blend in with their environment, while Sucker Punch dealt additional physical and emotional damage when striking an opponent first, though I still wasn't entirely certain what in the hell emotional damage even was. Not that it mattered. I didn't intend to leave the relics the way they were. When forged, Basic Combo Kit and Sucker Punch created a vastly superior relic called Mall Ninja's Strike, which allowed the user to blend with the shadows and deal additional damage on any preemptive strike while concealed. It was a solid skill, which had saved my ass more than a few times. Hell, it was even one of the base relics I'd used to forge Neural Slipstream. Even though Mall Ninja's Strike was only an uncommon grade, it was perfect for what I had in mind. I tossed what appeared to be a cheap Mall Katana onto the pile of survival equipment, then focused on the items with intention, which conjured a floating prompt. Would you like to transform the selected material into a cannon fodder golem? Doing so will destroy the uncommon relic, Mall Ninja's Strike. Proceed? Yes, no? I mentally selected yes. The floor immediately began to rumble while the lights flickered frantically for a few seconds. Unlike most of my spells, this one drew power not from me, but from the store itself. Although the cannon fodder golem seemed rather simple in nature, I was beginning to realize just how far from the truth that was. Sure, in a lot of ways, my taxidermid horrors were more physically powerful, but none of them could think or talk or reason. Even though the golems were limited in some regards, I was starting to suspect they were actually closer to dwellers than summoned minions. Was this the same process the backrooms used to spawn the myriad of creatures who inhabited its many levels? I couldn't be sure, but there was a certain logic to it. When the shaking finally ceased and the overhead fluorescence stabilized, the assorted pile of survival gear was gone and in its place was a hunched creature crafted from assorted camping gear, held together by patches of inky black shadow, and swathed in camo. It looked far more human than either Pony Puff or Baby Hands, though the similarities were superficial at best. A pair of deep purple eyes regarded me somberly from behind the clear plastic face shield of the riot helmet. It didn't have any visible mouth or even face, but those eyes burned with intelligence. "What is my purpose?" the creature asked slowly. Its voice was gruff but soft. Contemplative, even. I thought about it for a long beat before answering. "To protect," I finally replied. "To protect me. To protect my store. To protect my friends and my customers. I created you to be my chief security officer, to keep an eye on things and make sure everything stays safe in my absence." I regarded the golem closely, searching for any sign of hesitation. "You up for the job?" The creature grunted in reply, then broke eye contact and spun in a slow circle, taking in the security room and the bank of monitors. As it moved, I noticed that one of the CCTV screens was lit up, the feed displaying whatever the golem was looking at. I couldn't help but grin. Finally, the creature finished surveying the office and its purple gaze returned to me. "Affirmative, I can do what you ask." This, the creature swept a hand toward the security office, is an adequate start. Scaling your security protocols will be a challenge, though. You only have enough cameras to cover 19 entryways, and that doesn't leave any for an internal surveillance system. It fell quiet for a moment, face shield quizzically cocked to one side. "Still, you already have some decent countermeasures in place, and the temporal restriction field on the doorway anchors are an effective sorting mechanism." I squinted, studying the newly formed golem with curiosity. I'd hoped using a higher-grade relic would increase the minion's capabilities, but this thing seemed far more competent than either Baby Hands or Princess Pony Puff, not that I would ever say that to Pony Puff's face. I had no desire to be murdered and sacrificed to the dark god she claimed to serve. "You seem different than the others," I offered without preamble. "Smarter." "Why?" The creature tapped at its chest with an inky finger. "This helps. The more powerful the relic, the more powerful we become." "Just like Delvers?" I asked. It shrugged then shook its head. "Such knowledge is beyond me." It faltered. "I suspect there are similarities, though. Regardless, I sense the purpose behind my creation. I can feel your intention radiating inside my being. Such intention gives me clarity of thought. Clarity of action." I mulled over the creature's words. Croc had told me long ago that the earliest dwellers were not birthed, but rather thought into existence by the god box on the bottom level of the backrooms. As a mythic-grade relic, Corvo's blanket fort was insanely powerful, and I was starting to realize it was more than it seemed at first glance. Unlike all of the other relics I'd run across so far, Blanket Fort wasn't powered by mana. No, it was powered by the backrooms and allowed me to manipulate and create much in the same way the backrooms did. Like the creatures it created, I had the growing suspicion that the relic and its strange abilities were in some way connected to the progenitor cube on floor 1000. Almost as though the relic was a tiny shard of the cube itself. I had no proof of that, but it was the only thing that made any sense. "You got a name?" I asked, pushing away thoughts of the god box buried deep below. The creature shook its head. Not too surprising. I didn't have to think about it for long, before offering up a suggestion. Back during my first deployment to Iraq, Our convoy security commander had been a hard-charging sergeant who everyone called Camo Joe. Camo, because the guy was so motto that everyone joked that he bled camouflage, and Joe because he chain-smoked enough cigarettes to put even Joe Camel to shame. Turkish golds were his poison of choice, and I'd never seen Camo Joe without a half-burning cigarette hanging from his lips. Hell, I'd watched him run the 3-mile PFT, puffing like a chimney the whole time. Funny part was, even smoking, he outran everyone else in the company and it wasn't even close. For reasons I couldn't quite put my finger on, this shambling pile of survival gear reminded me of that hard-nosed sergeant. Camo Joe, I said, slapping the newly forged golem on the shoulder. That's what we'll call you. Camo Joe, the golem said as though testing the name out. That is adequate. I had no doubt I'd created the right guy for the job, but clearly his sense of humor was on the same level as Baby Hand's overall intellect. That was fine, though. It took all kinds to run a place like this, and having a no-nonsense security chief would serve me well. Now it was time to see just how sharp this thing really was. Sure, it could follow directions, but could it think on its own in the same way Croc could? With the resources we have on hand, I asked, what changes would you make? Camo Joe considered the question for a second, its purple eyes growing fuzzy and distant. It will take time, Joe finally replied, but after accessing the current fortifications, there are several modifications we can implement to further harden the facility and upgrade its security capabilities. First, I recommend we build a series of emergency response protocols. Situational scenario SOPs. Following that, we can install additional environmental traps and restricted access points throughout the store. Should someone or something manage to infiltrate and successfully launch an assault, that will mitigate the damage they can do. It gestured at the break room and the connecting security office. Turning this into an actual fortified command center will help reduce the risk as well. We can also implement a watch schedule, patrol routines, and create holding cells for any hostile forces we apprehend. The golem's answers were methodical and well-reasoned. Honestly, it was unnerving. Hell, this creature hadn't even existed 10 minutes ago, and now it was standing here, breaking down my entire security system, all while offering a variety of insightful fixes. Maybe I'd made this thing too smart. I pushed away my unease. Although I had reservations about my newest minion, I'd also felt the same way about Penny Puff, and she'd done an admirable job as store clerk. For the most part. I mean, sure, she liked to watch people while they slept. And yes, she screamed like a banshee at anyone who tried to haggle with her. Also, I was pretty sure she had set up a malevolent shrine inside one of the employee lockers in the storage room. Other than all of those things, though, she had done a bang-up job. Hopefully, Camo Joe would do the same. Sounds like you know what needs doing, I said. I pulled out one of the walkies and pushed it into Camo Joe's hands. Use it to get in touch. Let me know if you need any help, and if you can't find me, look for Croc, Jacob, or Taylor. Worst case scenario, go to Princess Penny Puff. Yes, sir, the walking pile of survival gear said before offering me a precise salute, then executing a sharp about-face. I watched its back shimmer as it headed through the break room and out into the store. A second later, shadow wrapped itself around the golem and it disappeared completely. A shiver raced along my spine. This is fine, I told myself, which was probably true. I'm sure that thing isn't going to go all Skynet, eventually staging a mutiny, then trying to assassinate me. That was just paranoia talking. And if things did go sideways, well, I'd cross that bridge when I came to it. Then I'd set it on fire with a Molotov cocktail and dump industrial-grade super bleach on top for good measure. Chapter 19. While Camo Joe went about his business, I snagged the rest of the security cameras and shoved the whole lot of them into my personal storage. My new security chief's assessment was right, scaling up my security would be a challenge, especially with finite resources. But after seeing how well the first camera had integrated with Camo Joe, I had a new idea about how I might be able to use them. To put my plan into action, however, I needed additional materials. Corpses to be exact, I headed over to my shiny new freezer unit, which I'd tacked onto the pharmacy using the blanket fort interface. The dark gray employees-only door, separating the lab from the rest of the store, was normally locked, but it swung right open for me. One of the many perks of being the owner. I rarely came here, and when I did, it was mostly to restock the elixirs that routinely spawned in the lab fridge. Every single time I stepped through that door, though, I felt a small stab of pride. I couldn't help but recall my glorious victory over the pharmacist and its crow-faced lab tech cronies. I'd used a good old-fashioned Molotov cocktail, one made from liquor and lighter fluid instead of magic, to burn most of them to death inside the cramped confines of the lab. The fire had destroyed most of the equipment, though everything had regenerated long since. That was one of the great things about the back rooms. Although this place looked like a room filled with inanimate objects, in reality it was all part of a vast living being. A giant, organic cell inside the body of a colossal, reality-warping beast. I fumbled for the switch and flipped on the lights when I found it. The fluorescents buzzed to life, bathing the room in bright white light, casting sharp shadows around the furniture and equipment. Centrally placed was a work table with a large fume hood, rising into the ceiling. Long, stainless steel counters ran along the walls and covered much of the floor space, their surfaces cluttered with an assortment of pharmaceutical equipment, digital scales and Bunsen burners, a sleek compound microscope and some sort of high-tech pill counting machine. I spotted a centrifuge and a bulky contraption labeled gas chromatography system. No idea what that was for, though I'd seen Jacob use it a few times while working on various potions and salves. The Sindel sure knew his way around the lab, which made sense given his background. There were also a variety of mortars and pestles, along with a multitude of scoops, spatulas, and other mixers. Glass beakers, testing vials, and flat-bottoms flasks were meticulously arranged on metal shelves, alongside neatly labeled containers filled with strange powders, liquids, and granules. I recognized a few of the compounds: ethanol, glycerin, formaldehyde, but there were a hell of a lot more that I didn't. Some of the stuff sounded completely made up. Biomimetic paste, fluoxin gels, chronosalt powder, quantum silica, whatever the fuck that was. I ignored all that stuff and headed over to the fancy new freezer, which was a third the size of the pharmacy itself. Croc helped me move all the pilfered kitchen equipment to one of the overflow storage rooms, then I started emptying my inventory of bodies. And parts of bodies. There was a disturbing amount of material to sift through. Plus, I'd harvested a good number of mimics, and a lot of their anatomy just didn't seem to fit into any convenient category. Still, as gory and disgusting as the work was, it went quickly enough, especially with a little help from Croc, who was only too happy to dispose of any excess material I didn't need. By the time I was done, I had huge crab legs and chitinous carapace stacked up along the shelves and sorted into several large crates. I suspended the gangly bellhops and the nightmarish hotel lodgers from the meat hooks, until they hung like slabs of beef ready for the butcher's block. As for the mimics, like I said, those were a bit harder to deal with. After they died, a lot of their mass turned into a weird, gel-like goo, leaving behind a vicious assortment of tentacles, eyes, and teeth. I moved one of the stainless steel tables from the lab into the freezer and went to work, carving what remained up like a disgusting Thanksgiving turkey. But not before I changed into some clothes I'd raided from Style for Less and tossed a rain poncho over the top, just for good measure. Once I was done with the initial butchery, I took some extra time to patch up Drumbo Rebooted and Cynthia 2.0. Both had survived the battle against the Shard Golem but had sustained some serious damage in the process. I summoned Drumbo and had the rather grotesque creature clamber onto the steel table and lay flat on its back, like a patient preparing for surgery, which was more or less the truth. Once the creature was in place, I accessed a secondary interface, appropriately called the Minion Masher, which let me directly remove and graft both flesh and metal onto Drumbo Chumbo without having to use a chainsaw or sutures. A holographic overlay appeared directly on top of the mangled creature. It looked like a tight grid of blue squares, which perfectly contoured the creature's body. Hanging in the air above the horror was an 8th scale 3D avatar, which slowly rotated in place. The avatar's legs glowed with angry red light and percentile bars appeared beside each limb, indicating their durability. Both read 0/100, which meant they couldn't be salvaged and would need to be replaced entirely. Almost all injuries, even severe ones, could be mended through the use of elixirs or restoration spells like pharmacist's scales, but once the durability of a limb hit 0, that was it. Game over. End of story. With a grimace, I reached out and tugged at each leg in turn. The limbs effortlessly popped off, almost like pulling the legs off an action figure. There was no blood or gore, which was a small mercy. Since the limbs could no longer be repaired, I tossed them to Croc, who swallowed them down in between bites of froyo. I was no longer shocked by the disgusting juxtaposition of it all. I replaced them with a pair of gangly bellhop legs, then added additional pieces of orange and purple exoskeleton from the juvenile kiosk crabs to create greaves. Although those chitinous plates were typically as hard as rocks, they became completely pliable while under the influence of my unhinged taxidermist ability. With the minion masher interface active, they were like clay that I could mold and shape until the pieces perfectly fit the bellhop legs, which were now attached to Drumbo's torso. Once I was finished with that, I decided to add a few more plates to Drumbo's shoulders, creating spiked pauldrons and wrap-around forearm bracers. They looked badass and would also serve as excellent armor. One of Drumbo's hands had also been severely damaged by the tumbling washing machine, though not so badly that I couldn't repair it with a little TLC. Instead, though, I decided to swap it for one of the cordless angle grinders I'd picked up in the maintenance quarters. As a general contractor, I'd seen exactly how much damage an angle grinder could do, and I pitied the poor sucker who ended up on the business end of that thing. Finally, I took another few minutes to inspect the relic sitting at the heart of Drumbo's spatial core. Just like Baby Hands, Pony Puff, and the newly created Kamo Joe, the horrors were powered by relics, which made perfect sense now that I had a better understanding of how both relics and mana worked. Trying to power something as large and powerful as Drumbo would drain my own reserves in a matter of seconds, but the relics themselves were a constant source of energy. Even those that used stamina as a fuel source instead of mana, acted like a battery. The one currently powering Drumbo was called Solitary Confinement and looked for all the world like a broken pocket watch. Despite the cool name, it was a cursed, shit-tier relic someone had traded in for store credit. It wasn't hard to guess why. The spell had a one-minute duration and, when activated, it caused the user to perceive time at an excruciatingly slow pace, transforming seconds into hours, and hours into years. Problem was, your body didn't move any quicker. In essence, it turned your body into an inescapable meat prison, which was genuinely horrifying. The horrors couldn't actually use any of the relic effects, though. They were just batteries, so, in theory, it didn't really matter. Still, I had to wonder if using a more powerful relic would have any sort of proportional effect on performance. Out of sheer curiosity, I decided to swap the Solitary Confinement for the uncommon Health Eater relic I'd looted from the Chandelier Mimic. With Drumbo looking good as new, relatively speaking, of course, since he was actually an unholy Frankenstein amalgamation of monster corpses, I banished him back to storage and took some time to patch up Cynthia 2.0. With her, the damage was largely superficial, though her fur would never look the same again. I grafted on more orange and purple crab pieces, until she looked less like an animatronic furry and more like some kind of futuristic space soldier in a chitin mech suit. One with a chainsaw hand, of course. I banished her back into the void, just as I had with Drumbo Chumbo. But I didn't leave the freezer. I had more work to do yet. Did I love being a mad scientist necromancer? Absolutely not. I never would have willingly picked an ability like this. Not in a million years. But sometimes you just had to play the hand you were dealt, and this was an ace in the hole, even if it was an ace slathered in guts and gore. I took a quick pit stop at the checkout counter to collect a few sacrificial relics, then popped by the concession stand for a platter of nachos and 1, or maybe 3, beers, before resuming my grisly task. I definitely needed to be at least a little drunk for this next part. I sacrificed the assortment of relics to bring Unhinged Taxidermist up to level 5. I could summon 2 horrors per relic level, which meant with the upgrade I could now summon up to 10 horrors at once. Whether or not I'd be able to control 10 horrors was another story entirely. Just like with mental micromanagement, each minion took a certain mental toll, and with that many running around, I was liable to end up in a coma. Still, that was a problem for future me to deal with. Current me was just excited to have so many meat shields at my disposal. The upgrade also pushed the relic over the first threshold, unlocking necrotic embalming, which better preserved the horrors, slightly increasing their speed, strength, overall health pool, and regeneration rate. Even better, it also increased each horror's level cap. Before the upgrade, my summoned horrors were automatically reduced to half of whatever level they'd been before dying. In the case of Cynthia, for example, it cut her down from level 24 to a lowly level 12. With necrotic embalming, though, the level cap was raised to 2/3 what they'd been in life. For Cynthia, that automatically bumped her up to level 16. Now that I'd upgraded the relic, I could finally forge a new batch of minions, and I knew exactly where I wanted to start. I quickly scrolled through my storage and grabbed what I was looking for. A door. A hotel room door to be exact. There had been a dozen spare doors sitting in one of the maintenance closets on the 5th floor, and I'd snatched all of them. The door was solid wood and far heavier than anything in a residential home. Pretty standard as far as hotel doors went, though. Typically, they were designed with solid core construction, which made them more secure, offered better sound insulation, and helped prevent the spread of fires in case of an emergency. It was perfect for what I had in mind. The only problem was it was just a door. Frame not included. Thankfully, I happened to know a half-decent general contractor with a whole pile of 2x4s and access to a sawzall. It took a handful of minutes to get the measurements I needed and another 20 to cut the boards to length, angling the corners, then nailing them together and attaching the hinges. Sure, the frame wouldn't be nearly as durable as the door itself, but it would serve my purposes well enough. With the door finally mounted, I set the whole thing on the work table and raided the freezer for the necessary body parts. I grabbed a bunch of crab legs, a pair of bellhop arms, and some various mimic pieces. Using the taxidermist overlay, I attached 6 spindly legs to the bottom of the door frame. Adding the bellhop arms was even easier. One poked out from each side of the frame as though the door itself were a long, rectangular torso. A malformed bellhop head went on top, complete with its circular red cap. Then, I committed an unspeakable atrocity by embedding one of the security cameras into the creature's fucked-up face. By the time I was done, the bellhop's eyes and nose were missing, and all that remained was a rectangular camera poking out from above the monster's crooked smile. The last part was the trickiest and took an hour or more to get right, mostly through a system of trial and error. Mimics had the unique ability to conceal and change their shape, molding organic matter into 100 different forms. I wanted to see if I could replicate that process, especially since I had so many mimic corpses to experiment with. I had to pick through the gooey remains for a while before finally discovering what I was looking for. Buried beneath the sea of eyes, tentacles, and rubber flesh was a small organ no larger than a walnut. It was firm to the touch and had the appearance of a naturally occurring crystal deposit. When I examined it in closer detail, a codex entry popped up, providing me with additional information. Greater than research inquiry, initializing. Test supervisor, junior astrobiological researcher, iteration 1.9371A. Test date, May 13, 3019 BCE, Julian Standard, updated for user preference. Subject, dissection and analysis of the mimicker node in a juvenile polymorphic mimic. Mimicae polymorpha. Specimen number 13941. Introduction. The focus of today's dissection was a peculiar, crystalline structure, herein referred to as the mimicker node, which is found almost exclusively in dwellers within the Mimicae polymorpha family mimics. When active, this small, Bioluminescent organ appears to be the keystone in the mimic's ability to undergo complex transformations, allowing it to assume the form and texture of inanimate objects with astonishing precision. Observations. Generally, the mimicry node is embedded within the creature's central nervous system. In some case studies, particularly among older and more evolved mimics, there may be more than one node, which allows for a greater range of transformative properties. Its luminescence fluctuates in correlation with the mimic's transformational activity, suggesting a direct link between the organ's function and the mimic's shape-shifting capabilities. Upon closer examination, the organ appears to be comprised of a series of intricate, interwoven fibers, pulsating with mana. It seems to resonate on the same dimensional frequency as the progenerated environment produced by the variant explorations of airship VES, possibly explaining how mimics can so accurately replicate the texture and coloration of their chosen forms. The dissection revealed that the mimicry node is further connected to a network of what can be termed as sensory receptors located throughout the mimic's body. This network likely provides the necessary feedback for the mimic to maintain its disguise even under close inspection. Additionally, mimics possess an enlarged visual cortex which also interfaces directly with the node. It is suspected that the mimic's multitude of eyes may act as a rudimentary video loop relay, providing real-time environmental data to the node, facilitating a more seamless integration with its natural environment. Hypotheses. The mimicry node operates as a magical resonator, absorbing ambient magical energies to fuel the mimic's transformations. Its bioluminescence could be a byproduct of this energy conversion process. The intricate structure of the organ suggests a high level of adaptability, possibly allowing the mimic to learn and store information about different forms and textures for future use. Interruption or removal of the mimicry node may result in the mimic's inability to change form, offering a potential method for dealing with these creatures while in the field. Additionally, trauma during the early pupa stage of the mimic life cycle may prevent the mimicry node from forming properly, further reducing the creature's capacity to accurately transform. Conclusion. The mimicry node represents a fascinating evolutionary adaptation, providing mimics with a survival mechanism unparalleled in the natural world. Further studies are required to fully understand the extent of its capabilities and the specific magical principles governing its operation. Understanding this organ not only sheds light on the mimics themselves but also opens new avenues in the study of magical biology and transformational magic.